mantra. How is everyone feeling? These are the typical questions that we're asked when we meet somebody, right? Does anybody ever ask you, hey, are you going to do some form of climate activism today? Probably not. And also you might be thinking, what on earth would that mean? What is climate activism? The typical image in my mind that I used to have in high school was I needed to chain myself to a tree and stop bulldozers from coming by, which is amazing, and that is an incredible form of activism, but it isn't something that I thought I could do, even if I really wanted to, deep in my heart. So, I'm going to ask you if you would like to participate in any form of climate activism. If the answer is no or you're not sure, we'll come back to it later. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story. So, when I was in high school, I went to high school in Caledon, so Peel region, not too far from here. And I went to an art school, so I specialized in dance. I loved dancing, loved animals, but that's pretty much all I knew that I liked. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I didn't know what career path to take. In fact, I was really torn between science and the arts, and I didn't know what there was in between. For some of you, you may be in the same position, or you may have experienced similar things. And even if you think you know where you're headed, I promise you that path may twist and turn, and that's totally fine. So what I wanted to chat with you about today was how all of those titles that were wonderful to hear, but still shocking to me, how those came to be, because I am exactly the same as you. We're all species living on this earth who care about where we live, and we care about the people around us. The fact that you are also sitting here and you chose to spend your evening here tells me that you're a special type of group. You're not an ordinary group that wasn't able to invest their time and their thoughts and their efforts into other things that are often quite large distractions that we find in our society, but you wanted to invest your time here. That is incredible. That is a first step to something really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you take from this. So, I knew, as I mentioned, that I loved to dance, loved animals and wildlife, loved hiking and the outdoors. I didn't know that I could make a career out of those things. In fact, when I look back, I think that maybe performing, dancing, doing ballet on stage, maybe that's what got me to feel more comfortable speaking in front of an audience. When I was in high school, I would not have realized that. So all the things that you're doing right now are little bits of a puzzle that you probably can't see the larger picture of, but you're just putting the pieces together now. I'm sure there are many achievements under all of your belts. Maybe there are puzzles that you've already created, but for the most part, there are pieces of the puzzle that you are still putting together. So when I was doing my master's, as mentioned, I did research on biodiversity conservation and science communication. I was really passionate and excited about that. I did a lot of work on the ground in different communities. The things that I saw and heard are quite devastating. I know that a lot of people still think that climate change is to come. I feel like I'm speaking to the right generation that knows that we're living through it. They know that it's right here, right now. And so that was even more apparent when traveling. I really traveled because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to see what was out there. And I didn't recognize that there are so many climate impacts happening right under our noses right here. So when I graduated my master's in 2019, I realized that there was a program launched called Climate Action Catalysts. I thought, that sounds perfect. That's what I want to do. I want to catalyze action. But I didn't know how. I didn't know exactly what it would turn into. But I was interviewed, and then I was paired with 4 other young women who were also from Peel region. And we were told to create a solution for our community to solve the climate crisis. What would you do? How do you solve the climate crisis? There is not one solution. What we know climate change to be is a very messy problem. Raise your hands if you've heard the term wicked problem. Perfect. So what that means is that every problem is interconnected with other issues and other problems. So we can't have true climate justice, for example, without gender equality, without racial justice, immigration rights. All of the social issues that you can think of are truly interconnected towards climate justice and having an equitable future. So while it's a wicked problem and really daunting, something I often love to tell people is that the solutions are also interconnected. If we have a solution, you're not just solving one problem, but it has a ripple effect and it solves many other micro solutions. And it might inspire others to then bring their solutions into your movement as well. So I diverge. I was told to create some sort of solution. And there were other teams across the GTHA, so Hamilton, Toronto, Scarborough, they were all coming up with these solutions, and my peers and I looked at each other thinking, we're so behind. We don't know what we're going to do. Some people were targeting fast fashion, others were doing a seed library, and while we thought those were amazing, it just didn't hit climate action hard enough for us. We wanted to change the world, and we didn't know how. So we had a meeting at the region of Peel, and we sat down with elected officials and folks in the Office of Climate Change. And they told us what the gaps were in the community. There were two interesting things they told us. Number one, there weren't enough young people delegating in council chambers. So for those of you who don't know, council chambers is a place where your city councilors, they congregate and they chat about every single thing that you can think of and see in your community, from signage to new medians on the road, air quality, even your climate change master plan. Every single decision is done in that room. And you're invited. I never knew this, but you are invited every single day. Everyone in the public is. It's free and sometimes very entertaining. You can take your popcorn and just see some councilors bickering sometimes over the smallest issues. I really encourage all of you, at least once this year or next, to sit at a delegation and see what it's all about. So we were told that young people aren't there enough. Why is this important? Well, when young people like you sit in those rooms, city councilors get scared. They get afraid because you are the voting future. You are going to be the majority that they need to change their platforms for. So it's very intimidating when they see, oh my gosh, the young people are listening. The young people care. They're not actually just on TikTok all the time not caring about the social issues. You know that's very much wrong. And so when you sit there, that in itself is a statement. But if you did want to say something, you're welcome to speak for about 5 minutes or so, put together a presentation, and talk to them about any issue. So we took the invitation, and we presented on the Climate Change Master Plan. We explained why we were in support of it and why the Peel region needs it. But we also demanded something. We told them that young people need a place where we can co-create policy to have a safe future. We don't want to just be patted on the back and congratulated, because that is what they did, to be honest. They said, great job, you guys are trying something new. And that was the end of the conversation. We said, no, we don't want to just be congratulated, we want to work together. We are well educated, well aware, and we have studied policy, we've studied different facets of our community. We're part of our community. We can actually help you. So something else I learned, which was fascinating to me, was that city councilors are not climate experts. They also aren't environmentalists, they're not scientists, but they're making decisions about science, they're making decisions about climate change, and so they actually do need us in the room if you're able to provide different ideas and different perspectives. So we demanded that as our first ask. The second thing they said is that there is more and more loneliness in our community. Neighbors are not speaking to one another. There's a lot of senior folks who are living at home and just left at home. Sometimes they take care of younger kids, but typically they don't speak to one another. And for those of you who know, Brampton specifically is a very diverse community, and oftentimes English isn't the first language. And so this has created a lot of barriers of loneliness. And you might think, how is this related to climate action? Well, it is. Research has shown that communities that are more resilient are going to succeed with the climate crisis better. So community resilience comes from us talking to our neighbors. It comes from us sharing ideas, sharing new perspectives. So if you don't already, I encourage you to speak to your neighbors when you go home. But that is making your community stronger, just a little bit. And if we all did that little bit, collectively, we would have a much more resilient community. So that's what they told us. We went back to the drawing board, still didn't know what we should do. And September rolled around. Who remembers what happened in September 2019? It was the very first something with Greta Thunberg. She did her very first climate strike, where she rallied the students from all over the world and said, hey, we're not going to school today on Friday. It's called Fridays for Future. We're not going to school because what's the point of going to school if there is no future for us to live in? And so we knew that most people in Brampton, Mississauga, and Caledon would probably have to go to Toronto to join that rally. Or they wouldn't be allowed if they asked their parents to go. Or they'd have to grab a go bus, go down. By the time they got there, the strike would be over. So we thought, what if we did our own? We decided to put together some posters. We just set a date and a time, threw it on Instagram and social media, just to see what would happen. And I still remember the co-founders and I, we were sitting together, we had brunch, and we were like, oh yeah, we have to go down the road and do the rally. It'll just be in a few minutes. We weren't thinking too much of it. A little nervous, thinking, what if 20 people show up? And when we went downtown Brampton, over 250 people were there with signs, protesting, rallying, and we were shaking. We were thinking, oh my goodness, what did we do? We were so happy because we knew that Peel Region cared. We knew that our neighbors cared. We knew that the dominant media that often shows that people of color don't care just wasn't true. In fact, all of our cultures are so deeply connected to the climate crisis. And so when we saw that representation out on the streets, we were relieved. We were excited, although we were underprepared. So we didn't have a megaphone at the time. We used just our voices, and we started to do climate chants. So a climate chant, raise your hand, has anybody done a climate strike before? Okay, so in September, you're all coming to Brampton, and we're doing the strike. Every September, we're doing it. So one of the climate chants, one that I love, is, hey, hey, ho, ho, climate change has got to go, hey, hey, ho, ho. And then everybody starts clapping, start marching, people are honking, and everyone is supportive and recognizes that we need to change. We cannot keep giving the same advice that I've been getting when I was in high school, which was over a decade ago. So let me tell you why. This room is actually divided perfectly into two groups. Let's pretend that folks over here, you lived in a world that is warming by 1.5 degrees. Does everybody know what the Paris Agreement is? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Awesome. So the Paris Agreement is when the conference of the parties, governments from around the world came together and agreed that we should keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees of warming, because otherwise the consequences would be catastrophic. So they thought, okay, realistically, we cannot stop climate change. I hope everybody here knows that as well. That is something that often is in a famous or common rhetoric, that we can stop climate change. The truth is we cannot stop it. We are living in it. And by saying we can stop it makes it sound like it's still to come. But recognizing we live in it, and we can actually slow it down, and we can limit the impacts, that is much more accurate to say. So, we agreed that we won't let the Earth warm up past 1.5 degrees of warming. And the folks over here live in that world. When things are over 1.5 degrees globally, we see Arctic ice maybe once every 10 years. The coral reefs are bleached maybe by 40%. And there's a list of other things. You can look it up online and see what are the consequences of a 1.5 degree future. This group over here, You live in a world that is warmed up by 2 degrees. Half a degree does not sound that much hotter, but on a global scale, it has massive repercussions. So what that means is that the Arctic ice isn't seen very often, and the coral bleaching is actually doubled. And the amount of species that are suffering changes, the amount of magnitude of natural disasters is exacerbated, etc. So if I were to tell you or ask you, which world do we live in? Are we currently at the 1.5 degrees? Are we currently at the 2 degrees? When I was in high school, preventing that 1.5 was the target. And sadly, we are right here in the middle. Just in February 2024, we passed the 1.5 degree. Globally, we failed. And we are right now in the middle. So what does this middle world look like? Well, let's think about it. What did you all smell last summer? We smelled a lot of smoke. It smelled like someone was barbecuing, but it was not ideal. We saw that neon glowing sun. There's a lot of forest fires going on. Right now in Alberta, actually, this past winter, when it's covered in snow. Have you heard of the type of fire that happens underneath ice? Look it up. I learned that one recently and it blew my mind, but that is happening in Alberta. And so what happens when things are too warm in the winter? It actually means the soil can't get saturated enough to prevent forest fires in the summer when it does get hot. And unfortunately in the winter, this past winter, they had tons of fires. So that means we are in for an even worse summer. I'm sorry, this is not the best news, but I promise I will inspire you. But we need to know the reality of what we live in. Not enough people are talking about it, so I hope that you can all share it. The reality is positive feedback loops happen. So when one thing happens, it triggers more and more to happen, and things happen faster and faster. To be honest with you, I didn't think I would smell that smoke until I was maybe like 80 years old. I thought we still had more time. A lot of scientists that I speak to are more and more shocked at how fast things are happening as well. And so that's the world we live in, right here, in between. So because it's not the same world when I was in high school, and things are changing now, I'm not going to give you the advice I was given. I'm not going to tell you to turn off your lights, recycle, walk and bike. Those are all great things. I'm not saying not to do that. Make sure you still do that and recycle. But that alone will not save the world. What is going to save the world? What is going to actually make change happen? Well, you and I are all implementing the solutions. I'm sure if I went around in the room, we could all think about ways in our personal lives we are taking accountability. But did you know that the whole concept of a carbon footprint and asking people how they can change was actually made by the oil and gas companies? Oil and gas companies that should stop emitting. The International Energy Association said we need to stop at 2024. No more oil and gas can be emitted if we want a safe future, and we're still producing oil and gas. They also pushed the blame on us, saying, think about what you all can do in your everyday lives. Well, we did that. We've all improved, and we're still not seeing change because they're pumping out massive amounts, billions of oil and gas. And it actually is not to meet global demand. I can go into a rabbit hole of that later, but what I will say is go to climatevillains.ca. That's a website that I created through my work at Environmental Defense, and it names, blames, and shames the exact people in Canada who are fueling the crisis. It is not a mystery. It's not like we don't know who the people are. They have names. We know who they are, and we need them to collaborate, and they're not listening. They're not listening because they're able to profit from the crisis, and it's unfortunate. So if you go to climatevillains.ca, that's a resource that I didn't have when I was your age, and that's where it comes in handy for all of you. If we think about a local issue, for example, the Green Belt, hands up if you've heard of the Green Belt. Amazing, almost everybody. That was on the news many times. I was on the news for that. The Community Climate Council, my organization, we were on the news for that. We protested. We were one group of many across Ontario that were protesting the Greenbelt protection. Who was it under threat by? Does anybody know? Our Premier, Doug Ford. And we knew, we named it, and we blamed, and we shamed. And we asked him, hey, why are you lying? And he apologized publicly to everybody. And so what this means in the world that you're living in is these people are exposed, they have names. And I think that's an excellent thing for you to take real tangible action and raise awareness with your siblings, with your parents, with your communities. The place that you can take climate action isn't necessarily by what I tried to do, by traveling. It's really where you are right now, the communities that you have. Those are your trusted circles. Data shows that people are not compelled to act when they see science or when they see stats. What they're compelled by is stories. And what changes people's minds are people they trust. And so think about your circles, your family and friends. Those are people who trust you. And if you educate them on any issue that you find compelling on climate change, they're going to believe it. They're going to look it up, and it will at least get a conversation going. So that is something that we call activism. Yes, mind-blowing. You don't need to tie yourself to a tree. Just having conversations with the people that you know and love, and talking to them about the things that they also love is a form of activism. Another form is going on social media and signing a petition. That is an excellent form. Artwork, creating art that tells stories is another form. There are so many things that can help change the future as long as we all act together. Another one is speaking to your MPs, doing the delegation that I mentioned earlier. These are all forms of activism that seem a lot more approachable as a first step, don't they? And I'm sure all of you can do this, and even if everyone in this room did it, it would have an incredible positive impact. So, when we think about what can be done, does it seem a little bit more achievable if I were to ask you, are you going to take climate activism today? Probably, right? Yeah. It seems like, yeah, I could have a conversation with somebody about something I learned. I can go to climatevillains.ca, sign a petition. I can go to the Community Climate Council, a group that's nearby, and volunteer. I can offer my advice to a city councilor on an issue that I really care about. All of those are forms of activism, and I know you all have it in you to do that. And so, what I wanted to wrap up with is talking about my personal journey. Would you believe that when we were downtown Brampton doing our march, even though I was yelling on the streets, I was sharing stories with the community. Even after the rally went on, everyone wanted to stay and go to a local park and clean up litter, and so we did that. Throughout that entire time, if someone asked me, was I an activist, I would say, no way, I'm not an activist. Then in my career, I said, hey, let's start an organization. After the rally, we got a light bulb moment. We said, you know what? Where did everybody go? Everyone was here, they were excited, they were pumped up, and then they left. I was honestly crushed. If you go to a rally, you'll see that you get a lot of positivity, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of happiness, because you're surrounded by people who mutually believe the same things that you believe, that we need a safe future to live in. And everybody's ready to see that change. It's really inspiring. And when they left, I was really crushed, because I thought, how can we find them? And so that's when the co-founders and I decided we're going to put together an organization called the Community Climate Council, where people like that can congregate. We can come together and not just protest, not just have rallies to raise awareness, but we want to improve climate literacy. What that means is raise awareness about what climate change is. How does it impact us? We actually launched a website called the Climate Hub, and if you look at it, you'll see all of the local impacts happening in Peel region, but of course, it is very applicable to Oakville as well. One, for example, was in downtown Brampton 2 springs ago. 100 homes had to get evacuated because their basements were flooded, because the snow melts just happened so quickly. Similar to this year, does anybody remember we had like maybe 1 or 2 16-degree days and then it just spiked up to 30 degrees? We're not getting that nice in-between change anymore. And so some of the consequences can be flooding. I have 2 friends who are farmers. They talked about the drought that they had last year and how hard it was to harvest crops. It's not really talked about that we have drought right here in Oakville and Peel. So check out the Climate Hub. You can see what other things are there. But the other pillar that we wanted to focus on is political advocacy. So that's where we invite young people like you to learn how to speak to city councilors and just have conversations, whether it's delegating or creating an event, any type of lunch and learn that you'd like. Really, our style there is to be community-led. So whatever ideas folks like you have, there's now a space to come and make that happen. And I'm really happy to say, as of April, the Community Climate Council turned 4 years old, so that's really exciting. Next year we'll be 5 years old, I cannot believe it. But all this to say that when I was in high school, I never knew I would be a CEO of something. I didn't know I would create a nonprofit organization. And so I really hope that this inspires you to find your community, find the people who are like-minded with you, because I certainly could not have done it alone. It required a lot of community members who were also inspired, but the core four founders, when we first started, we were determined. And I think if you have enough determination and you're all focused on that same goal to make positive change, incredible, incredible things can happen. I also want to leave you with this. Do not wait. Don't think that you have to be a certain age to do something, or you need a credential, or you need to graduate, or you need a certain amount of money. You're ready more than you think right now. You come full. So you aren't coming here incomplete, you're coming here full. You have full experiences, a full culture, a full environment, a full mindset, a series of morals and values. Those are incredibly important to carry with you, and that is what will guide you to make positive change in the world. So, as you speak and listen to your peers today, I hope you take this with you and make positive change within your community. Thank you all so much.